A few Sundays ago, the Special Report investigated the raids by the South African forces across the borders, mostly aimed against ANC officers and members. But there was another cross-border raid that fell into a different category because it was aimed against the Namibian liberation movement, SWAPO. The attack on Cassinga in Angola is still the source of much bitterness among Namibians. Early morning, May 4, 1978, Cassinga, 250 kilometers north of the Namibian border. Several hundred SWAPO soldiers are on the parade ground. In the rest of the little town, family members and refugees from Namibia do the household chores to prepare for another day in the bush. And then death rains from the sky.
There was no ground support. It was basically three companies under the legendary Colonel Jan Breitenbach. But the three companies were fairly depleted companies. They were mostly citizen force. They were from 1, 2 and 3 parachute battalions. And the heaviest support weapons they had were a few light anti-tank weapons and I think 60mm mortars. And they flew in and were dropped directly after the initial preparatory bombardment, which was an aerial assault by the Canberras and the Buccaneers.
Now, what kind of bombs do you use from these aircraft? What would they do? Destroy property, mostly go against personnel, burn the place down?
The weaponry that the Canberras and the Buccaneers used were anti-personnel bombs and larger, I'm not sure if they were high fragmentation bombs, but typical bombs for personnel, killing of personnel, anti-personnel, and bombs that could destroy bunkers. And the idea was to catch and to emphasize surprise, which they did, because they apparently, when the Buccaneers and the Canberras came in, most of the people were assembled on the parade ground, and they had they caught them totally unaware, and literally hundreds of people died on the parade ground. Any large external operation that the South African Defence Force did required political sanction. That meant that this operation, like any other large external operation, was sanctioned personally by the Prime Minister, B.J. Vorster, under the advice of the Minister of Defence, who was P.W. Botha, and of course advised by the Chief of the National Defence Force, General Malan, and the Chief of the Army, General Constant Viljoen. But operationally, the operation was under the command of the officer commanding of 101 Task Group, which was General Ian Gleeson. On the ground, the forces were commanded at Cassinga by Colonel Jan Breitenbach. Well, the truth is somewhere between the two perspectives, that of the SADF and of SWAPO. Cassinga was both a military camp as well as a refugee collection center. It was both a planning and logistic base for plan, as well as a center where people that had fled and had assembled. There is sufficient circumstantial evidence to indicate that both were the case. The fact is that the South African intelligence was probably not that good, that they were trying to go in very deep and be very bold in their efforts. And that, of course, afterwards it served the propaganda purposes of both, to indicate on the one hand that it was a massacre, and to show people the undeniable evidence of the hundreds of women, children that were killed. For the South Africans who were there, who participated, it was a great military experience, in the sense that it was the single, and still remains the single largest airborne assault that was performed by citizen force soldiers of the South African Defence Force. The figures that I have is the South Africans lost in the attack. 3 killed, 11 wounded, and 1 guy which went missing and was never accounted for. And there was a bit of a foul up with the initial parachute drop, and a lot of the soldiers were dropped into a river and off target, slightly further to the north than they would have dropped. So the South Africans suffered, let's say, 4 killed in action or missing, and 11 wounded. And SWAPO acknowledged to about 600 dead and about 340 wounded. And these order figures seem to be more or less correct. The figures afterwards of thousands of people, I think, are slightly exaggerated.
If we're talking about 600 SWAPO, are they talking about guerrillas or women and children, or both, all combined?
I think it's a combined figure. I think the South Africans at the time estimated that there were about 300 trained SWAPO cadres in the base, and that there was also a base just outside, which was part of the attack plan, of people that were under training, of a few hundred. But the exact figure